This is Marketplace. I'm Amy Scott. It's no secret that some of the places in the country with the most economic opportunity, like Silicon Valley, New York, D.C., are also some of the most expensive places to live. But now that may be convincing a certain kind of worker, members of the so-called creative class, to consider living in other parts of the country. Richard Florida is author of the 2002 book, The Rise of the Creative Class, and published some new research about this demographic at CityLab. It's good to have you back on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me back.
So first, a definition. What do you mean when you talk about the creative class?
Well, this is something I identified nearly 20 years ago. And really what I was trying to figure out was the people who drive our new innovation knowledge economy. So that's people who work in science and technology, who do research, who are entrepreneurs, but also artists, designers, musicians, and cultural creatives. Add them all up, and it's more than a third of our workforce, and probably in excess of 40 million Americans work in these jobs.
We tend to think of these workers, these creative class workers, as clustered in the big, expensive cities, mostly on the coasts. But you decided to look at what you call the geography of talent. What did you find?
Well, I think it is true that the creative class per se is massively concentrated in the coastal superstar cities and tech hubs. But you also see big clusters in Baltimore and Philadelphia. And then finally, I think, which was kind of the most eye-opening thing for me when I looked at the new geography of the creative class, is the surge in the creative class in places like Pittsburgh, Salt Lake City, St. Louis. In fact, when I looked at the top 10 fastest growing creative class centers, only one established high-tech metro, Seattle, made that group. I think that's a change that I didn't expect and was kind of a good news, I think.
What do you think's going on there? Are these cities just doing a better job of attracting these workers, or is part of the story that people are just getting priced out of the sort of superstar cities?
I think both things are going on. Cincinnati, Detroit have made a great effort to make themselves more appealing to talent, but also, as you accurately say, it's a heck of a expensive proposition to try to make a go of it as a young person in San Francisco. And it's no longer a gaping difference, between the quality of life or amenities. Pittsburgh or Detroit or Cincinnati or Cleveland offer you pretty much a similar bucket of lifestyle amenities that you would get in one of the expensive places. So I think it makes sense for people to say, the heck with this, I'm going to one of these other so-called rise of the rest places.
But with that rise, do these cities then start to experience some of the problems we've seen in San Francisco and Boston and here in Denver with, increased inequality, gentrification, the things that have come along with the rise of the creative class?
Yes, 100%. What I think, though, is in places like Philadelphia or Denver, you have the opportunity to learn from what has happened in San Francisco and plan to become more affordable or to provide more housing, to cope a little bit better with inequality.
It's been almost 20 years since your book, The Rise of the Creative Class, came out, which encouraged cities to attract these creative class workers. And you've received some criticism for that, for allegedly fueling gentrification and inequality. How has your own thinking changed since then?
I think I certainly underestimated the velocity and ferocity of this change, which really kicks into high gear, after 2010, and we begin to see this kind of hyper-gentrification. This divide, if you will, is getting worse. So I think it's time that we as cities and as a country begin to become more vigilant in both recognizing this and working to counter it. One last thing that I think is very important to point out. People see this data and sometimes say, well, every city is doing better. If there were a half dozen or a dozen original tech hubs, there's now another dozen places that are beginning to improve their status, but that still means there's hundreds of U.S. small and medium-sized metros that are suffering and that we need to take seriously.
Richard Florida, co-founder and editor-at-large for CityLab, also a professor at the University of Toronto. Thank you so much.
I very much appreciate it.